Okay, Improvisation Center is back again with, the Scion. But this is a video that is kind of a little somber because what we're getting ready to do, as the title states, is swap out an engine. Why do you ask that? Well, because this little piece of shit right here, which is known, this generation of this VVTi 16 valve dual overhead cam engine is known for heavy oil consumption, and as a result of heavy oil consumption as well as faulty piston rings, from what I've researched, the engine essentially destroys itself in relatively short order, and it's really got no margin for error as far as being forgiven. So if you let this thing go low on oil, even if it doesn't seem like it's low, just the idea that because it drinks a lot of oil, you run the risk of the bottom end going dry. And of course, if you know anything about an engine, if the bottom end goes dry long enough, you start tearing up rod bearings. And that's essentially what I believe happened here, because, well, this thing started making noise more and more to the point where when it warms up, it starts rattling and shit. And it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny the way the thing sounds. It sounds literally in the crankcase like somebody's in there with a little ball peen hammer. Like a little hamster is in there with a ball peen hammer, just tapping that shit. But the sound increases at times. It won't be a steady rattle, but it'll increase in intensity of sound as you rev the RPMs up, and sometimes it'll calm down at a higher RPM, but it is there. It's not like it goes away then comes back, goes away then comes back. It's there. It's just a random sound, so more than likely it's an incident where we have multiple rod bearings fucked up, rattling, and all that shit. Make a long story short, this engine's got to come out. This is not an engine that you're just going to pull the bottom end out and replace rod bearings in the car. This damn engine comes in like 3 sections. Your head, your crankcase, and a balancer body or something, I think they called it. Some bottom end. You got to take this whole damn engine apart in order to get to the rod bearings. So, engine's coming out. We have a JDM, Japanese domestic manufacturer engine, low miles, on order coming in. The engine in question came out of Japan. It's this particular model engine, minus a couple components like the exhaust manifold, timing cover, and some of the accessories and shit. And it's supposed to have like around 50,000 miles on it, so it's literally a baby. So we have that engine coming, truck freight. But in the meantime, this shit's got to come out. And in order to get this shit out, we got to disconnect a bunch of shit. Drain some fluids, disconnect a bunch of junk out of here, get everything opened up so we can make room for our new JDM engine. And then probably at some point later on in the future, if I'm feeling froggy, I might try to rebuild this piece of shit so I could at least say I have a spare engine. That is, if it's not damaged in any way where it might not be salvageable. But I think it's still going to be good because the engine still does run. It just doesn't sound good. So I'm going to go ahead and start draining fluids, start pulling some shit apart. Stand by. Alright, got a bunch of shit pulled off this engine. As you can see, exhaust manifold, air intake tube, other shit rad, splash pans from underneath. Come over here and look around, we can see the whole engine is pretty much opened up. Now, I'm kind of ready to pull this thing out, but I have a couple other little issues too I might want to point out. One, the front transmission mount, it's shot. Great. So with that, more than likely I'm probably going to have to replace all the other engine mounts, engine and training mounts on here as well. But the biggest problem is figuring out exactly how the hell to hoist this thing out. Toyota, in their infinite wisdom, did not provide any kind of real means to hook this damn engine up in order to lift it up out of here. It's almost like they never intended this engine to be lifted up with a normal crane under normal circumstances. So I have to see how the hell I'm gonna work a chain around this, or where I could hook something up here, because this intake manifold right here is all plastic, and I can't just have chains up against that plastic because we don't need to damage that. But yeah, like I say, there's a cross member right here. This cross member piece right here, I had to take that loose in order to access the spot underneath to get to the torque converter bolts. Got all that shit out. Already pointed out the exhaust. Got all the bolts off of the bell housing right here. This is the line right here where the block and the bell housing meet up on the transmission and engine. All that's loose. This engine mount right here is disconnected. So technically this thing is ready to come out. There's like one hose left though that I gotta be able to get to. It's a power steering hose, and I really can't get to it until I get the engine out enough to be able to reach around in there and get a socket and ratchet on there. And there's also a wire harness that runs underneath the intake manifold that you can't necessarily get to it. And again, Ford in their infinite Toyota in their infinite wisdom made this wire harness as one whole piece. Part of it right here goes underneath the intake, comes up right here to this big old block of plastic and crap, and then it goes over here and connects to this box right here. And there's no real means that I could see for disconnecting the wire harness from that point. So it's like I gotta get the engine up from around the wire harness and take care not to damage anything, because, well, all this shit's pretty tight up in here. It's really a fucking mess. So our next move is going to be get our crane in position, get some chains, and kind of do a little reconnoitering on this engine, see where I can find a good safe spot to anchor some cranes, or maybe even not the crane, the chains. Find a good spot to anchor the chains, or worst case, maybe get a chain around the bottom of the engine block and up at a safe spot near the intake, where I can just hook both ends of the chain up at this point and then hook another chain up to the motor mount right here, and more or less have it in a triangular formation as far as cradling the engine. And of course I have to take the hood off. But yeah, the bullshit continues. Let me go ahead and get the crane and the other crap. I'll be back. Stand by. I had to pull the AC compressor out from right here underneath this water port and underneath the alternator, because the AC clutch is hitting on the frame right here. I can't even get this engine to go that way anymore so I could get it to clear from the damn transmission bell housing and the torque converter. So with the compressor off, we're going to see if we can try this shit again. You can already see we figure out a way also to get the chains situated here. Hopefully we don't damage anything. I am going to have to pull the intake manifold off because, again, like I mentioned, the wire harness comes from this breaker box right here, goes underneath the intake, comes back out over here. Part of it goes into the car itself. It's really stupid fucking design, but we got another part off, so let's see if we can get this damn engine out. Okay, finally got this damn engine out of here. Took all day, it's a pain in the ass to do, and you end up having to disconnect a lot of shit. And you'll probably end up breaking some shit too. But had to disconnect the transmission mounts in order to be able to move the transmission some, in order to get the spacing between the torque converter and the flywheel so I could get that clear. I had to remove the AC compressor because it was binding on the frame rail. I had to disconnect remove the intake manifold entirely because Toyota, in their infinite wisdom, as I said, routed this entire wire harness underneath the damn intake, and there's no way to disconnect it outside of removing the intake manifold. Stupid fucking design. But also, this intermediate block right here for the CV axle, had to remove that from the side of the block as well. And a couple power steering lines, had to disconnect that shit too. Had to move the ABS module to be able to get a little bit extra spacing over there, along with this power steering pump reservoir. Had to get that out of the way. I did break a hose fitting right here, and I know I broke one connection on this power steering pump right here, so I got to see what that is exactly, and probably go to the junkyard to source one of those. If not, replace that sensor or whatever the hell it is, but it'll need replacing. So far from what I could see, I did not break anything else, but a couple of the motor mounts are worn out. More than likely I'm probably going to be replacing all this shit yet again, because well, at least that rear one there that was a pain in the ass is still pretty solid. But that one right there, that one looks like it's going to be bad. The one that was in the front was bad. And the one right here, the bolt's missing. Don't know what that's about. But, yeah, whatever. All I know is this piece of shit is out of here now. So, there's more I still have to do with this. I'm going to have to get the alternator off, the timing cover, and the motor mount brackets, a couple other little odds and ends, in order to put those parts on the JDM engine, and then probably try to figure out some kind of battle plan to put this bullshit back in here, because putting it back in, I'm sure, is going to be just as bad, if not worse, than getting it out. Because putting shit back in, you got to actually be careful with what you're putting in, or how you're putting it in, so you don't damage anything after getting it back in. So yeah, I have plenty of time to think about the dread that is to come putting this bullshit back together. So for right now, gonna take a break. Okay, our next course of action here is going to be removing of some components from this engine that we're going to need to transplant to the JDM engine. One of the things I believe will be that motor mount bracket, get our power steering pump. We're going to obviously have to grab our crank pulley anyway. This other intermediate idler pulley, probably take the alternator off, because if I'm not mistaken, the alternator is on there, but I'll take it off anyway. Really, all the stuff has to come off. Even the valve cover has to come off in order to get the timing cover off, because it stated in the listing that you need to take your timing cover to put on there. And that's probably because different models of cars have a different style timing cover to accommodate different brackets and stuff. So yeah, like I say, all the stuff on the front's got to come off, including the timing cover. So go ahead and get that crap off, and then at that rate we should be ready to throw this engine in the truck and haul it up to the garage. Alright, got all the stuff stripped off this engine that we're probably going to need for our new engine. Got our timing cover, crank pulley, because it's not really a balancer, I don't think. Water pump, that so-called idler pulley is not an idler pulley, it is a water pump. Also have the water tube, pull that off, motor mount bracket, water pump pulley of course. While we were at it, we ended up pulling the coils out in order to get the valve cover off. And along with all the other crap, got our power steering pump, alternator, and the valve cover of course. Probably just going to end up using the power steering pump from that, if it's got the water pump and the, not water pump, the alternator and the valve cover. Either way, we got extra parts, but if we put this engine back together, all that crap and then some will have to be added in order to make this a complete engine again. But with that, can now figure out a way to hoist this thing back up again in order to either get it into the truck or otherwise get it up to the garage. So I'm going to go ahead and get that out of the way, because we don't want this engine sitting out in the elements where it's going to rust out and be no good. So stand by. Alright, we got our new JDM engine on a pallet in the back of the S10, and for all intents and purposes, a lot of the stuff that they said would not be on there is actually there. I mean, we do have the intake manifold right here. The throttle bodies are different though between our shit and what was on there. Have the water tube right there that I pulled off. Have the power steering pump, even with the little broken fitting right there. Let's see what else we have here. The wire harness, they cut that shit. So we're gonna have to end up pulling the intake off anyway to swap shit around and stuff. I'll probably just take this whole intake off and swap them around. But yeah, really everything we need is there. Even the timing cover is there, balancer, water. Shit, there's really nothing we had to pull off outside of the intake. So yeah, this engine is, for all intents and purposes, pretty damn complete. So in the meantime, we got to get this shit out of here though. So I'm gonna go ahead, get the chains wrapped up and yank this thing out of here. So stand by. All right, got our engine on the ground. As you've seen, we pulled the intake off, got that piece of wire harness out of there since it was already cut. What else? The valve cover, had to actually put the old valve cover back on because the one that was on this engine had a small section broken out of it. I was able to get all the fragments out of the lifter valley. Don't need any particles bouncing around in there. Really, that's kind of about it. We're really actually ready to start putting this thing back in the car. Just got to drag the car over here, and as we do start putting the engine back in there, I can start putting pieces back on as we get into a position where the engine can be lowered safely with those parts on. So that's going to be our next thing, getting this thing back on the chains, back in the air, and over the engine bay right there. So we already hit the plateau. Now it's all downhill from here. Okay, on the old engine here, there are a few components that I'm going to have to remove because the plugs on them are different from the ones that are on our new engine. A couple little sensors. This one, I believe, that one, and that one. Those need to come off, along with these hoses right here and this fuel line right there. All that needs to come off to go on our new engine. So this fuel line here is kind of similar to a Ford fuel injection setup where it needs those special tools for the lock ring type setup. I hate those things, but luckily I have some of those tools so I could get this fuel line off right here versus taking the whole fuel injection rail off and just swapping it out as one piece. But like I say, we're going to have to get these other sensors off and a couple little hoses off. So we're going to go ahead and get that done and get on back out in the heat and get this crap together. I could say we're kind of past that halfway point because, well, the engine is technically in the car and I have it bolted up to the transmission. Still have it on the crane by one chain here because this other chain is kind of in the way of me putting on our intake manifold, which is going to be the next thing I got to bolt up. I already have our wire harness routed through here, so I got to finish securing some different points because this wire harness was kind of bolted up at different spots, and there's other little odds and ends back here I want to make sure I take care of before I fully secure that, because after I get that done, then I really want to get the whole powertrain mounted back on its mounts so I can get this crane completely free of this thing, because at that point I could put the hood back on so we can keep everything covered just in case it wants to rain or do something. So at that point, we're really kind of coming into the advanced stages of getting this piece of shit put back together. It's really just a whole bunch of little shit. Plugs and connectors and all the other little garbage that I removed off of here in order to pull the old engine out. So I'll go ahead and continue to work. Let's go. One thing about this fuel line here, even though it uses that same Ford style lock ring crap, the way this thing is designed, you can't get this tool around here because there's a little lip or flare that keeps this tool from just sliding freely into the thing. Another dumbass design. But luckily they redeemed themselves, Toyota that is, by making this assembly here, the pressure regulator, removable with the fuel line. So obviously I ended up taking the old regulator with the length of fuel line that I need off of the other engine, so I could bolt this up to our new engine over here. As far as this is concerned, well, I could go about that a couple ways. I could either somehow work some shit in there to get this little end off, or just make it a habit to go to the junkyard and find an entire assembly like that and be able to carefully remove that crap, or take a pressure regulator and grind this lip away so I can be able to get a removal tool on there. Either way it goes, more crap for a later date. This stuff, the old stuff, is going on our engine. So we already have some of the other crap put on there, sensors that I mentioned and everything, some hoses, all that good stuff are plugged up. I'm just piecing things together little by little to ensure that I got everything covered. I don't want to put it all back together and find a wire plug or a hose that I forgot. So I'm going to continue to take my time and get this garbage back together. Okay, got our torque converter bolts in. As you can see, you got one little access hole right there to rotate the engine around in order to get to each bolt. To make it a little easier in the very beginning, I had to remove the starter in order, go up here, had to remove the starter right here so I could do our initial spin around of the torque converter to line up everything. But I ended up finding I didn't really need to do that because the flywheel is made where there's open spots near the middle of the hub of the flywheel to allow you to stick your finger in there and rotate the torque converter around until you get things lined up. So either way, I have to put the starter back in. No big deal. It's just 2 bolts. Also have our little tube right there for our thermostat, or thermostat housing really. Alternator's hooked up. Still have to put the AC compressor back on, but before I do that, I'm going to put this cross member that goes right here. That is this piece right here. It goes lengthwise to support the middle of the engine along with the mount right there, and it hooks up on the back end by that other pain in the ass mount in the back. I'll get that put in next, and then go ahead and continue with our final assembly of the big stuff and whatever few little wire plugs are remaining. That includes our air cleaner housing right there that covers this area, hooking up to the throttle body. So we're almost done. Yep. All right, we got our cross member and our front transmission mount in place, along with the few bolts on the rear mount. all that is secured now. Our whole powertrain is officially mounted. So now we can start putting all the other big stuff on. Like I said, we got our air cleaner assembly, AC compressor, exhaust manifold, and a few more plugs here and there. So I'm gonna go on and start getting the remainder of this shit put together and hopefully finish this by the end of the day. So let's go. Okay, apparently we got everything put together from the way it seems. All the different hoses and wire plugs, all that shit is put together. I even replaced this, what do you call that damn thing for the emissions? Purge valve, that's what that shit is called. Stupid shit. I even had to replace that damn thing because it was bad for a while. AC compressors in, exhaust manifolds in, starter, battery, hoses, radiator, blah, 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 blah. Put some oil in the reservoir for the power steering pump. Got some antifreeze in here, but I'm probably going to have to run this thing and let it kind of burp itself and add some more as it circulates coolant through the system. And, well, let's see what happens. This thing's got oil in it. Had oil in it from wherever it came from. So that's good as well. So let's see what happens. All right. Let me cut it off real quick. Well, as you can see, our engine runs quietly, without noise, other than the normal running. So, yeah, still got some things to put back on here, like the hood, obviously. I'm gonna have to charge the AC system. One of the CV axles pulled apart, so I'm going to have to address that little issue. But other than that, our engine is running. So go ahead and let it run a little bit, probably look over some things after the fact, wrap this whole project up because this thing really got on my nerves. But the biggest part of the project is done. The engine's running. I'm happy about that. So with that all said and done, I'm gonna sign off now because it's hot as hell out here. So, as usual, like, subscribe, notifications, all that good stuff. Positive comments are always welcome. Yep, I'm done. Appreciate your viewing. Catch you later. I'm out.